Hello all, and I hope you guys are all having a great week. So tonight, Middlesex University Product Design Engineering, and Design Engineering are really excited to host our fourth talk in the 2021-2022 guest lecture series. So this series, it runs weekly throughout the academic year on Thursday evenings, bringing together a vibrant mix of speakers from across the full spectrum of design and engineering. So we have a mix of leading practitioners, opinion leaders, radical thinkers, and emerging talents to inspire and support all the professional development of all the participants. Tonight, we're hosting Mohammed Aziz. He's joining us from Dubai, and he's a graduate landscape architect at AECOM. And Mohammed Aziz is a UAE-based emerging designer. He specializes in architecture, landscape, and urbanism. He has a strong interest in and a passion for circular economy, creative placemaking, landscape urbanism, and social sustainability. So he pursued his architectural studies at Heriot-Watt University and Curtin University, and he currently practices as a graduate level landscape architect at AECOM, allowing him the opportunity to explore the public realm in depth and fuse landscape with architecture and urban design. Outside of design and outside of work, Mohammed is an avid cycling enthusiast. He enjoys capturing moments and spaces through sketching alongside exploring urban places. And he also, what's it called, cannot do without a black coffee staple in the mornings as well. Now, Mohammed, he penned a superb article in the MDXPD 2021 magazine, contributing to the special feature on design portfolios, which was a comprehensive collection of insights and advices from an industry across. And his article, Step Up Your Portfolio Game, is featured on pages 103 and 104. So definitely download the publication and have a read of this article. And without any further ado, Mohammed Aziz with a talk titled Design for a Circular Economy. So Mohammed, it's all yours.
Right. Thank you, Ahmed. So, can you all see the screen?
Not yet, not yet.
All right, let me just show them. Okay, hope you can see it now.
Perfect.
Great. So so first of all, thank you everyone for having me here, and also thank you for your patience. So now, as Ahmed has mentioned, my name is Mohammed. I'm an architect by training, but I currently practice as a landscape architect, and I'm based in Dubai and also at the moment in Abu Dhabi. That's where AECOM has its main headquarters in for the Middle East practice. So for today's session is the design for circular economy. Something wrong with can you see the next screen?
Not yet. Yeah, no, we can see it now. That's perfect.
So just a little bit from brief info about me. Basically what Ahmed has briefly mentioned. So I've done my architectural studies at both Heriot-Watt University and also in Curtin University. And throughout my time and period of studies, I've developed my interest in both in urban design and landscape architecture, which they are similar, but not the same as architecture. So they're now growing as their own distinct professions. But I personally see them all as, as professions that should go hand in hand. And well, my other research interests include design innovation, social sustainability, and of course, circular economy, which is what we're going to talk about today. And this is something that I'm relatively new to, and it's been almost 2 years since I've first embarked on a journey towards circular design. And I think it's about time a lot of us as designers, as engineers, as innovators, adopt circular economy principles into our design thinking and process. So let's just start with by understanding circular economy. What's the first thing that comes in your mind when you hear the term circular economy? What do you understand by the term?
Someone, Manuel Gutierrez, he said recycle.
Recycling. anything else?
Feel free to pop your responses in the chat, guys, or you can unmute yourselves quickly and shout it out as well. That's totally cool. Sustainability, Manuel saying as well.
Yeah, sustainability.
Zoe Needham saying make, use, recycle, reuse.
Yeah, that's the perfect, yeah, that is what circular economy is. So basically, circular economy is, it opposes or challenges the traditional linear economy approach, which is what a lot of businesses and governments and even design practices adopt. And the linear approach is basically you take, make, and dispose. So we extract natural materials and natural resources, we excavate lands, and then we use them for manufacturing, and then eventually we dispose them. They're not considered for recycling.
Doing it on purpose. Yeah, it's like a subtle nod to El Chapo. Yeah.
I'm sorry, someone had a response.
That was screened by the during scapularium.
Papa, please unmute yourself, please. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So as I was saying, the linear economy is basically you take, make, and dispose. So natural resources and materials are extracted, lands are excavated, they're then manufactured into products, and these products eventually, as the life cycle comes to an end, they're just disposed. Now, throughout all of these three stages, there's a lot of waste being produced, and this is what brings us to the idea that in circular economy, we consider or treat waste as a design flaw. And this is something that needs to be eliminated because, and this brings us to the question, why circular economy? Why is this something that we're stressing about so much at this current time? Now, I'm saying this as an architect and as a built environment professional. 40% of the carbon dioxide emissions globally are generated just by buildings, right? 11% of them comes from the construction process only. And this is something that built environment professionals, that is designers, architects, civil engineers, and of course, environmentalists need to really consider of how we produce and create structures, spaces, and products. So this is what circular economy, on the other hand, is supposed to be. Now, there are several diagrams and models that illustrate circular economy, but I decided to go with this one because it's quite simple and straightforward. So we first start with the design thinking and process. And at this stage is where you consider what happens to a certain product or material structure at the end of life, which is the most crucial part of the design process. If you want to consider applying these circular economy principles in a design or an engineering project. So, and why is this important? Because this way it becomes more efficient in the later stages, that is, in the reuse, repairing, and recycling stages, and also when it comes to the recovery. And in this way, it reduces the chances of producing waste. That's just considering what happens to a certain product at the end of the life. It just, at least half of the problems are solved, right? That's how waste is eliminated. And as a result, it reduces drawdown on virgin materials, which often happens as, when you extract resources or excavate land. Both of these processes, they pose negative impact on the environment. And this is something we cannot afford at this stage, considering the crisis that we're in. We're currently in the anthropogenic epoch. Now, so as what I've shown was the principle of what's like in a circular design process. Ideally, these considerations are to be taken in the design process and also in the manufacturing, but not all projects follow or adopt the circular principles. But it's still not too late to, extend a product's life cycle. So we've got reuse, repair, and recycle. Now, these three stages are to be considered or followed in sequence. Now, reuse is the highest priority. Then you've got repair and then recycling. Now, recycling, yes, it is part of the circular economy. It is crucial, but what happens is oftentimes, and it's a common mistake that often people use, and that is we tend to consider recycling and circular economy as synonymous, but it actually shouldn't be the case, right? And why I say this is because recycling, oftentimes what happens with recycling is, let's just take an example of demolished structures, right, which results in recycled aggregates. Now they're helpful in terms of the reuse into some other products, but over time, because they've lost their value and they've been downgraded, and as a result, it also does not guarantee a much longer extended life cycle as opposed to reuse of materials. Now, with reuse, the aim here is that to make sure that a certain product or material that we want to reclaim is in its best possible condition without further damage or alteration, and which is why reuse is considered as the highest priority as compared to recycling. Of course, recycling is also important, like I said, but it's crucial that we consider reuse as the first stage. And then you've got waste. It's the last thing that we want as designers, as innovators. And so instead of considering what happens to the waste, and which is always the problem with manufacturers, they tend to realize that I'm sorry, I'm just a bit going off track, but what I'm trying to say is that the problem with some manufacturers, is that they tend to produce objects without realizing what will happen to them once they reach their life cycle. And as a result, recycling is often considered as a last, as an afterthought, when it actually shouldn't be the case, especially if you have to adopt the circular design principles. Now, circular design, even though this term has been coined almost 30 years ago, it really isn't a new trend. Now, it has been going on since the beginning of 20th century. And this was during the aftermath of both the world wars, which had a drastic impact on the economy and on the society. And because of the impacts of the war, there has been a disruption in the demand and supply. That is, there was a serious shortage of money and materials. So what happened? People decided to recycle or reuse the materials that they no longer needed. And artists decided to use that as a creative medium to explore, their artistic practices. At that time, upcycling used to be called as creative reuse. And one of the designers which inspired me to embark on the journey towards circular design is Lina Bobardi, who was an Italian-born architect. So she trained as an architect, but then in her formative years, she moved to Brazil. And this was during, there was the crisis that happened in Italy around the World War. And so since her migration to Brazil and Latin America, she also dabbled into other related fields such as furniture design, set design, and curation and arts, writing and editorial practices, and of course, political activism. So she had several professions under her belt in at least 50 years of her career. And this was during the time when there was, again, with the whole demand and supply problem and the practice of recycling of daily objects. Lina Bobardi decided to apply that into large-scale design projects and also in furniture as well. So there's one of the quotes which a lecturer from my university, Curtin, now she's written several books on sustainability, luxury, and one of the books focuses completely on Lina Bobardi and her projects. And this is what she's written: architecture is a luxury, the utmost salvageable luxury from demolition, and is amplified in most contexts since it is a permanent phenomenon. And you could apply this statement to design as well to a significant degree. And even though products have a shorter life cycle as opposed to buildings and cities, but the impact that they can create on the environment and the society can be long lasting. So technically, it is also considered as a permanent phenomenon as much as architecture is. So there's one project which I really loved, and which helped me further develop my knowledge and interest in circular economy and upcycling as a design practice. So this is one of her projects which has been well celebrated, and it's called the Scse Pompe Cultural Center. It's located in Sao Paulo in Brazil. Now, this site used to be an industrial complex of warehouses and factories, which eventually got abandoned. And instead of demolishing those structures, Lina decided to reuse them and convert them into something, into a complex of spaces which are meaningful and that can bring happiness and joy to the society. And that was possible by transforming these structures into a community center. And in that center, you've got sports facilities, you've got theater and galleries and exhibitions and restaurants. So what I really love about this project in particular is, instead of just demolishing, this project had minimal changes to the structures. Most of the materials and structures here have been preserved, have been kept intact, unless there were some parts or components which required replacement because of their life cycle reaching to an end, and also their performance and value have decreased over time. But also at the time when modernism and brutalism were quite a trend during the mid-20th century. So brutalism was quite one of the most influential design movements, both in architecture and also in general product design and also furniture design as well. And the way the structures have been left exposed without any concealment, concealings or decorations or ornaments. It's in a way that structures have been, the materials here are honest. There's justice to the materials that have been used. There is no, how do you call it? Ornament to cover up the texture of materiality. And that's just ideally what architecture is supposed to be. And the same applies to design as well. Use of honest materials. And this is also key to circular economy. And as you can see here underneath in the second picture below, so she also had established an art studio which focused on furniture design, especially the use of economical timber furnitures, because timber is considered as a bio-based material which can be reused, they can be dismantled they can be reconfigured. So that's one advantage of timber, is that it's not only sustainable, but also they can be reused for other purposes once they're no longer needed for a certain function. And so this is where she used benches and tables entirely out of timber. So that is a practice of circular economy, and that's at least how I would see it. And even many designers would also agree that because timber, again, it's a sustainable material, using that would count as a circular design practice or strategy. So that led me to further develop my ideas, explore the notions of circular economy in my projects, which I'm going to be showing here. And I've categorized them into 3 areas. Refuse, that is, creation of new materials, whether they're, giving the materials that are no longer needed a new form, or how they could be, hybridized with other materials, particularly bio-based materials for greater stability and performance. You've got rebirth of structures that are no longer used, the structures that have been discarded or were at risk of being demolished. And then you've got resource, use of nature, conserving it to let it sustain for the future generations, which is very important. And in this case, water is an example, because let's face it, water is a finite resource and we cannot deny the fact. And this is one of the 2 projects which explore water as an important element of design. So the project which I've done here was located so this was Curtin University's building 201, which is a design school. Now, this building was built in 1972. It opened to the public. So now I don't have the images here, unfortunately, but the structures, because at the time, again, modernism and brutalism were very popular, the structures were made of just gray concrete walls. They were exposed with no concealings or ornaments. But the problem with those structures were that there were minimal access to natural daylight. So they were just mostly covered. There were just few small perforations in which you can retrofit windows in. And on top of that, there were technical problems like leakages, and also with roof. There was even an incident where part of the roof collapsed because of the leakage, and there were some issues with the mechanical services. So after having auditors to assess the performance of the building, now the problem with built environment is, if you compare it with with built environment and infrastructure with products, there's quite a difference in terms of scale and complexity. With Now, products tend to be a bit straightforward in terms of their life cycle. What happens when they're produced, how they're consumed, and then what happens when they're no longer function or they're no longer needed. With buildings, on the other hand, and infrastructure, there's so many layers to understand, to solve the problems that are, that are associated with reuse and recycle, and what happens, to understand whether fate has to be determined for a particular structure. That is often, oftentimes when there's a decision made that, okay, the only way for the building, to deal with the building is to just knock it down using a wrecking ball. And this was the case of Curtin 201 as well, because of serious flaws within the building, like structurally and technically and also environmentally. There were decisions made to knock it down and build a new campus in another location. On the other hand, but the brief, on the other hand, was to challenge that proposal and to rather come up with another solution. That, in this case, was adaptive reuse and refurbishment of the existing structures. Now, this required quite maximum alterations, but at least it saved cost and damage to the environment. And of course, with waste production being eliminated was one of the key goals in the project. So, like I said, because the walls were mostly covered, they restricted access to the daylight, which is, and it has a very serious impact on students' well-being, because in design studios, you do need a lot of lighting, especially natural light, in order to work and be productive. And imagine just working in a space that has gloomy interiors. You cannot be productive. And especially when you're working, all night, pulling all-nighters, being hooked to the screen, and with no exposure to sunlight, it becomes a problem, both environmentally and also in terms of psychologically, if you like. So as a result, the decision was made here, and I proposed to take the walls down entirely, except for the columns or the core structures. They must remain, of course, but instead of demolishing those walls, how about we carefully take them down and sell them off to some other developer or construction company that needs, that are working on a project, that are building walls or structures. That in a way would save money and also reduces waste again. But there would be chances of minimal waste being produced, though it wouldn't be significant. But in that case, what the solution was that those minimal waste that's been produced from taking out the walls, you could use them as recycled aggregates in 3D printing these dendriform structures. So they're biomimetic in a way, if you think about it. They've been inspired by dendriforms, and because they branch out the structures, they also provide more stability to the floors. It is just, not to mention its aesthetic value, because it defies the conventional way of erecting structures, which is often, the person lintel. I'm sure architectural technology and interior design students, if there are any here, would know how structures are often built. And because in today's time, it's important to explore alternative methods of construction, I looked at the possibility of 3D printing non-conventional structures like these, and how can we create them using composite materials such as recycled construction debris, earth, glass fiber, and even like let's say in Dubai, sand is it's a locally available material. In the case of Australia, what could be the locally available material that you could use as a feedstock for the 3D printing of the structures. So you can have a look here. They look a bit intimidating because of their appearance, but I assure you that they don't. They look much better than the conventional ones, which look quite mundane, frankly speaking. And you've got the CLT frames, which cover the building as a whole, and within these, the CLT frames, CLT stands for cross-laminated timber. So again, timber is being used here, which is quite economical because they can be later, you know, configured or dismantled and, you know, used for some other purposes. And within these frames, you've got the Etfp panels. Now, Etfp is quite well known for reducing minimal impact on, you know, the thermal performance of the building. So they can reduce heat loss, which is crucial, especially during winters. And as shown here, the concrete floor slabs have been retained. I mean, that's the whole idea of adaptive reuse of the structures, or else it will happen complete demolition of the building and then rebuilding, which is not only time, I mean, which not only produces waste, but also is it's not cost effective. So yeah, so this is how the structures would look like. You know, the core and the plates without any spatial configuration or the, you know, functions over here. So it's just completely the space, you know, the common, the core and the plates over here. And how it looks like when you retrofit them with, you know, the lighting, furniture, carpet. And this is how I think a design studio should look like. Because in such environments, in order to thrive, for design students, you need to be able to thrive in such environments which are a bit vibrant. You have bits of colors here and there, and a balance of that with, of course, you know, with monochromatic kind of textures, right? So in this case, you've got the like the structures that have been 3D printed. Now, how I propose them is that they don't need any sort of, you know, painting or ornamentation. They should be just left exposed. Of course, they need to be treated or covered with, you know, resistance to external environmental conditions. But then it's important, you know, to commemorate the legacy of the universities and its all, you know, previous architectural style by retaining that brutalistic style. I mean, it's technically a pastiche if you think about it, but then, I mean, that's just how it was part of the brief to, you know, consider the past. So just a section drawing of, you know, the building from the top. So this is at the roof level. Again, with the circular economy approach, the idea here was to create a roof garden which is productive in the sense that, you know, students and faculty could, you know, grow their own food. They can even, you know, experiment, you know, use plants as medium for them to experiment the designs. And I'm just saying this as someone who was also into landscape architecture and also currently practicing as that. I mean, I personally think that architects or even designers in general can take, you know, inspirations from nature in the design process, and which is why the thought of creating a roof garden was what I had in mind when designing the roof space, because there was, in the previous design of the building, the roof space was technically, it was just an attic with with the services. So the services here have now been moved down to the lowest floor, and now you've got it's kind of greenhouse, if you think about it, with you know, the Etfp structures and the dendriforms. And by the way, what's interesting here is that in these structures, you've got a bit of metallic or weatherproof insulation. And the reason for that is they help harvest rainwater through these voids or openings that you have between the Clt frames and the Etfp structures. So from there, you've got the water flowing down through the dendriforms, and then they're reused either way, you know, to the roof gardens for the plant to grow, or it can be reused and recycled for toilets as well. And yeah, I mean, the drawing looks a bit complicated because of the details, but this is just an illustration of how the design is supposed to function. And this is just a perspective view of the new campus from the outside. It looks a bit radical. It's completely different from how it used to look at a brutalistic structure. It was completely rectangular with no curvilinear forms, nothing fancy, if you like. But the difference here is that there's now greater use of vegetation, both inside and outside, and a more harmonious form of the building. And of course, with consideration of sustainable strategies like use of timber, 3D printed material structures from recycled debris. These are important. Some of the idea, you know, strategies to help tackle waste and the impact on the environment. So this is another project which was penultimate to my final major project. And the theme for this one was community. And so I first started by exploring what community means to me. And in the process of, you know, disseminating the term community and, you know, words associated with it. Now, there are two issues that were derived from community. And this is as someone who has been based in Dubai. And I'm sure these are some of the issues that you might also relate to in London as well, considering that both Dubai and London are cosmopolitan areas. So the two major issues here derived were social segregation and consumerism. So there's a high consumption rate of, you know, materials. We live in a consumerist society that people just tend to buy things that they don't necessarily need. It's become a norm, unfortunately. And as a result, this has led to, you know, more consumption of products and also more disposal of them, which as a result leads to more waste being produced. And in such communities, it's really hard to convince people that it's about time we gave up new materials or, you know, things like, you know, fancy materials and products that are just have been newly released. And yeah, so the idea here was to, instead of using new materials for construction of new buildings and spaces, my idea here was to recycle and upcycle the discarded ones. And they could be also created as you know, meaningful and interactive spaces for people to use. And my first thesis statement was, what if ephemeral structures are they play an important role in circular economy, considering that most of the time in ephemeral structures you use discarded materials, which can later be, they can be reconfigured. They can also be dismantled for other purposes as well over the time. So in this case, you've got the discarded PVC tubes, which you've normally find in construction and waste sites. They could be reused. And then I later explored forms and using, digital tools like Grasshopper, how you can array these materials to create a sculptural structure. And in this case, these structures together, they look like muqarnas, which is an important element of Islamic architecture. And the advantage of this type of structure is that you can aggregate them. You can create larger clusters of these forms, which is why it's often argued that ephemeral structures they pave a way for circular design. So that was just one initial exploration and some renders of that, how it looks like, and how structures like these, temporary structures can play a role in shaping communities, whether it's in the form of, events. So in this case, if I'm not mistaken, this is somewhere in London, and it's a street which is not often used. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea here was that how can these structures be used as public art, because they have to, because ephemeral structures do have the potential to be used as public art as well, and which as a result can create a convivial space or a vibrant space for people to gather and to socialize and interact. And in this case, you've got the street being taken down, reclaimed for the pedestrian use, and splash with a splash of colors and furnitures, and events like pop-up libraries, pop-up urban farming, and of course with these structures, and it creates that a vibrant space. So that was the first exploration, but now considering that that I wanted to create something more, less tactical and more, in a way, the structures that can be used in the long term. And the idea here is that how can we create communities out of upcycled materials almost entirely, and also at the same time they are, the form and density of these communities are compact, so that they facilitate easier access to transportation and transit, similar to how you've got 15-minute cities in Barcelona, and I was targeting for 5-minute cities. So what you've got here are standard sizes of shipping containers. So the idea here was to explore the use of shipping containers as a design medium for for uses and functions like even for residential purposes. There are a number of projects where houses have been made using shipping containers, and it's the same goes for retail spaces and offices and even creative hubs. So these are the standard sizes of the shipping containers, and how you can further aggregate them, play with them. And then there's this one is a cultural center, or more like a gallery space, a multifunctional hall, and how this could be built using upcycled doors and windows entirely. And this, in a way, represents not just upcycling, but also convergence of communities, which was the aim to address the two major issues derived from understanding communities. And that is, first of all, upcycling or upcycled materials are the new sustainable, they are the new luxurious, and they're the new beautiful. And that's something that we need to instill in people's minds, instead of, as opposed to encouraging them to buy fancy material, because you cannot always buy, just get fancy or new items, which you wouldn't want to use eventually later, unless they have a longer lifespan or durability, and you intend on reusing them in future. Then that's perfectly fine. But for a situation like this, how do you cut down waste and consumption? Is by educating the community, which is the most important. It's the key to circular economy, if you think about it. As much as devising policies and design framework is going to help with the design economy within cities, educating communities is also very important. So in this case, so we're not only upcycling the materials, but also we are educating the people about coexistence of communities, different ethnic groups, gender, race. So we're all equal. That's just what the message of this this building shows. Now, I wouldn't consider this as a building. It's more of a public art, which is adaptable to different events and functions inside. So as some of you may recognize or realize, that the solution to these two problems was designing a creative community, or it's more like an arts district or a community hub. Now, talking about, again, educating the community and encouraging them to be a part of this circular design process. So another function that I've designed here was an upcycling factory, or thrift shop, if you like to call it. And how it works here is that, people discard the materials that they don't want anymore. So this is like the drop-off space. And from there, it either goes directly to the thrift store, or they go to the upcycling and recycling facility. People dealing with those materials, they decide, they assess the value and the performance of a certain product or material, and they decide whether it's worth keeping them, whether it's possible to extend their life cycle by reusing them into something different. And if that's the case, what happens is they're sent to the material, they're recreated into some other product, or let's say furniture or another type of clothing, and then they're sent to the material archive storage. And then from there, they're sold to the thrift store, and this is where customers buy materials that they want. They could be either upcycled materials, or newly reformed structures, or just secondhand materials which have been directly sent from the materials drop-off area. So these were some possible configurations of the community hub, which in this case is the arts district. So you've got a pop-up library, an art gallery, you've got artist residencies, and also a makerspace for designers and engineers to collaborate and test their ideas collaboratively. And you've also got here a communal kitchen for the community. And that's also one of the aims to create this notion of convergence of different cultures through cuisines. You know, people get to know each other's cultures by sharing their, exchanging the knowledge of, not just the cultures, but also the cuisines. That's just how, in a way, it results in a sense of community or a sense of belonging, which is often what cosmopolitan cities lack, the sense of belonging within communities. And the idea here is that communal kitchen is one of the facilities that help tackle this issue. And as a result, they also they create close-knit relationships between people living in that vicinity. So after considering the configuration of structures, which is the advantage of shipping containers, you can configure them. They're flexible and adaptable to different events and programs. And as you can see here, you've got the space adaptable to different events throughout the year in different programs. And shipping containers can also be reconfigured over time, but this is not shown here in this video. And yeah, the reason why the arts district was downsized to this, to a smaller space is to create a much more, I guess you could say, a sense of intimacy, like in terms of the space. The more intimate a space, the better it is for the people to interact, if this is making sense. And also it also fulfills the goal of a 5-minute city. And as you can see here, this arts district is surrounded by a complex of different housing units, which was another issue that was addressed within this whole consumption problem. With the consumption pattern, there's also another problem with cosmopolitan cities is lack of affordable housing. And the idea here was, how do you create a compact and but also at the same time spacious housing, which also offers a sense of privacy, something akin to maybe not a villa, but a space or a residential unit which has an open space somewhere. Now, the open outdoor space in these residential units are inside out, as opposed to having them outside, which is typical of villas. And these housing units are targeted to the students, the creatives, and also those struggling with those having financial problems, and of course those that struggle with having access to affordable housing again. And as far as the materiality is concerned, they are the way these houses have been designed is that they're more of what I call living capsules. So you can configure them, and they're more of plug and play housing systems. You can plug them, you can dismantle them, you can reconfigure them in another location. It's easy to build and unbuild or dismantle. And the way that the structures have been built is that you've got these walls, ceilings, and floors made of rammed earth, which is a very sustainable material because it has lower embodied energy in carbon, which is very important in today's time. In order to have a net zero society or community, you need to invest in materials that use low carbon impact, or that does not require a lot of energy consumption, if this makes sense. So in this case, it was mostly the rammed earth, which work as the core components of the house. And you can dismantle the roof, the walls, columns, the floors whenever needed. So again, this is the arts district, how it looks like without the residential or the housing units. And you've got, so you can see you've got the material lab and the thrift store. This is where people get to learn more about, the importance of upcycling and, reusing the materials in either way, whether it's, whether they engage in DIY projects or they sell it to another person that needs it, or, that wants to reuse it for some other purposes, is just how people in, us would ideally learn more about reuse of materials. And again, with thrift shop, it's an opportunity for the how do you call it? Not the users, the inhabitants within this community to also sell their own products that they create. So in a way that helps them develop that sense of, to foster that entrepreneurial thinking, if you like, because it's very important, especially in today's time, how to be self-sufficient in such trying times. And another way to educate the community is by having these games and interactive activities. So you see these people, they're playing scavenger hunt, digital scavenger hunt, and they get to find and discover a hidden element. It could be a piece of waste or an information. This in a way helps in community building, which is very, again, crucial to convergent communities. And yeah, you've got the communal kitchen here on the right. So you've got, people, the idea of the kitchen is that people can also come in, cook together, share their ideas and knowledge on the cuisines, as I mentioned earlier. And then you've got these maker spaces, which is like the creative a think tank for designers, for engineers, for artists, for creatives, for innovators, anyone that wants to make a difference to the society or to the community by creating something innovative. Yeah. And as you can notice, everything here is just made of upcycled materials, from the glass bottles as part of the lighting to these shipping containers. So yeah, here's what a section looks like of the community. And I think I've sent an image of, it's just a still image of the section in the magazine or the portfolio advice. So this one is an interactive, and I think I've mentioned in the article that it's important to present your ideas in a much more interactive manner using GIFs or GIFs and 3D animations. So you've got this communal kitchen, public space, you've got the maker space and material lab, and the public space again. And these are the housing units, how they look like. This slide was supposed to show the exploded diagram of a housing unit, the components and the materials, but it seems to be missing. I apologize for that, but basically something that I've mentioned a moment ago about being made of rammed earth and composite of concrete, not entirely, but it's just mostly rammed earth material, which you can later dismantle these structures for other purposes. Or if you want to, let's say, upgrade the house by adding another story, then that's possible. this is another project, a very quick proposal which I made in just 2 days actually. And this was for the Abu Dhabi Municipality. And the brief was cool Abu Dhabi. Now, the problem in this part of the world is that there is a higher rates of urban heat island. And that's basically, the temperatures here tend to be very high and they're unbearable, especially for someone that comes from the north. I mean, imagine what it's like, you know, to travel to a city which is at 45 degrees hot in summer. It's just unbearable for someone, let's say, from the UK, unless you get used to it over time. So the idea here was, how do we tackle urban heat island in this given space? It's a very small space, and the idea was to create a public space for the community. Now, the idea was to create these shading canopies, which of course they not only provide shade, but also, as you can see here, they harvest rainwater, which is very important. And considering that there's a water shortage in Abu Dhabi, especially, like in general, there is not much of access to clean water as it used to be, say, in the past, right? It's just being rapidly overused and abused. And how rainwater and even water from the surrounding buildings can be reused and recycled to cool down the space, because water in the traditional Arabic, or especially in Moroccan architecture, as you can see here, you've got these kind of they're not, I wouldn't say hammam, but the sahan is the term we use for these open spaces with water feature, and they help cool down space. So it's one of the strategies which has always been used in traditional both Arabic and Islamic architecture and design, and it helps in ventilation as well. So back to the structure. So these structures, they are more like devices that help with catchment and filtration of water for its purpose, which is cooling down the space, and also as a node of social interaction for the people. And to some degree also helps with the growth of the vegetation in this public space. And the exploded diagram you see on the left, so they're made of PV panels, colorful ones, and I know it looks a bit childish, I must admit, we're having different colors, as you can see here in the reflections, but there is a reason why I deliberately added colors, and that is to make it more child friendly, and it needs to be interactive as a form of a public art, if you think about it, considering that the temperature again is not welcoming throughout the year. Mostly kids tend to stay indoors. Probably the only time where you'd find children playing games is during the evening time. So what can be done to encourage them to use the space even in during the daytime? And that's through the use of colors embedded in the PV or solar panels. And of course, the purpose of these panels is to absorb solar energy, and they help generate electricity. So that's like a renewable energy strategy and sustainable design strategy. And in this case here in the project, the catchment of water and recycling of it is what makes the design circular to a significant degree. Now, some of you may argue it's not entirely, but the idea here is that because circular economy is still an ongoing how do you call it, a theory that's still, or a practice that's still ongoing, right? It's technically prototypical if you think about it. There's a lot more development needed in, you know, application of circular principles in design, whether you're designing a product or a space or an infrastructure. So just a, you know, section of what it's, you know, how it would look like underneath. So you've got the green pavers and trees, which help in reducing the heat, and you've got water from public toilets in buildings, and they first have to go through the grey water and sewage water. The filtration treatment system helps purify and treat the water, and this treated water it later gets sent to the water storage. Yeah, so you've got the treated rainwater here, and also the treated rainwater, which you later use them either in, you know, to grow, you know, to help cool down the space here and to grow the green pavers and trees, but also to store the water feature here, and of course the fountain. And it's the splash fountain, which was designed specifically for not just the children, but also for adults, for basically anyone to just to, you know, engage and play with these spaces. Now that, you know, splash fountains like these aren't supposed to be just for kids. Adults also need to use them every now and then. Helps relieve stress. So yeah. And as you can see, you've got these cascading steps, which they're quite an abstraction of the idea of, you know, broken rocks and, you know, recycled aggregates that you normally find from demolished site. But these aren't really, I mean, some of these are repurposed materials that you find from the, you know, from the construction site, but they're not entirely like recycled, if you like. And this is at nighttime. It looks very lively. If you look at it, like you see kids and even the parents, you know, just running around, having fun, taking pictures. It also offers a space for the people there to, you know, to relax, to meditate, and, you know, also it also offers, you know, a sense of maybe solitude, but not really. But also helps you just get out, you know, get out the stress you've been engaged in throughout the day because of work or any other, you know, any related situation that you're in. So yeah, this was the proposal for the project. Unfortunately, it didn't make to the finals, but it was worth an experience. And I think there's still a lot more that I need to learn, that I can learn from these projects. And also as a designer, I think there's a lot more that I need to learn about circular economy and its application in design. And this was my final project of my undergraduate degree. And it's the productive landscapes, and situated in the outskirts of Perth in a town called Subiaco, which requires a complete redevelopment, and that was part of the brief. And the problem that I wanted to address here, which is quite serious, especially with COVID situation. Now, the theme for the studio project was delight, but there were two more, you know, crises that I wanted to explore. One was the environmental issue, and the other is social issues. Now, we currently live in the anthropogenic epoch, so most of the catastrophes that we're currently facing, especially with, climate change, global warming, ozone layer depletion, which also as a result has had a a negative impact on both the environment and the society. It has led to events like wildfire in Perth and also in California, and most of these catastrophes have happened as a result of human-led processes and actions. And this has further accelerated since the Industrial Revolution. And it did have an impact on agriculture quite severely because of the new introduction of tools and methods of growing crops that have emerged since the Industrial Revolution. And also with that, the introduction of vehicles, autonomous vehicles like cars, trains, and the like. So these factors, some of them at least, have as a result contributed negatively to the environment, which as a result has also had a negative impact on us as well, right? And then on top of that, COVID rose up from those ashes, as an apocalyptic rider on it, just on the verge of wiping the population in the most brutal way, if you think about it. And the pandemic, if you think about it, the pandemic has forced us as consumers to rethink our lifestyle, the choices we make, and most importantly, how the food that we eat is actually produced. More people have been increasingly aware and conscious about that. So because of that, my manifesto for this project was how regenerative agriculture can help as a design medium to reconcile both people and nature together. Is there potential for that? And how eventually, or in the longer term, regenerative agriculture can help shape the communities and cities that we live in future. And so this was, so just understanding the concept of delight and how that could be integrated into the the manifesto and the social and environmental concerns. Now there are three domains of design or architecture, which are firmness, utility, and delight, right? If you consider the Vitruvian theory of architecture, firmitas, venusitas, and utilitas. So here you've got delight as the key element to consider in design. Now I personally think there should be 5 elements of design, or at least in architecture. So you've got the firmness, utility, delight, ecology, and community. Now, social sustainability has to be considered almost all the time in design projects. You need to consider designing for people. I mean, empathy is one of the design elements that you need to consider when you're designing a product or a service, or even a space. And ecology, by ecology, I mean the sustainable practice, or in this case, applying circular economy principles in design of a service or product. If this makes sense, I hope you're all with me. So yeah, these were the 9 design touch points of delight, but I'm just going to focus on a couple of them which relate to circular economy design. One is technological innovations the other is reclaimed material, and then you've got a combination of interstitial landscapes and healing environments, which basically deal with greenery and agriculture. So as far as technological innovations are concerned in this project, first of all, it's the non-conventional structures, of course, which would help stand out, at least from the aesthetic point of view, and also from the functional and performance point of view as well, if you think about it. And what's important here is, similar to the previous project that I've shown of Abu Dhabi, you've got canopies that provide shade and harvest rainwater. And this water could help in growing of the productive landscapes, which is something I'm going to talk about in a while. You've also got the algae facade or bioalgae structures with base material, such as concrete, which would be 3D printed in differential growth curves as shown above. I don't know if you can see this clearly, but this was my initial design concept of having kind of a biomimetic structure, which is entirely or almost entirely made of with bioalgae as a medium, because there's also another type of algae which is bioluminescent, and I'm sure you might have seen it, and they help they're quite ideal in the use of public spaces. This is how I see the use of algae, and also within the interiors as well. And then you've got the reclaimed materials, which is again the upcycling of either discarded materials or invention of a new material by testing and exploration. So you could perhaps explore the potential of recycling plastic as as a design structure for building, as is possible. In fact, there are a couple of interior design projects which use recycled plastics as a medium for the design of these the walls, and also not just the ornamentation, but also as the structure itself. Or you could possibly use an assemblage of reclaimed materials in their raw form to create an organic yet austere design. And it could be more like a collage if you think about it. This was one of my initial explorations, which I haven't shown here because of the time limitation and also with number of slides. And again, with the use of differential growth as a form or a biomimetic facade structure, with patterns that are embedded with moss or algae, which would create a new facade. And then you've got the housing, which was another issue to be tackled, because this project that I proposed here was a mixed-use development, and the aim was to create not just an agricultural facility for the people to grow their own food, but also flexible housing units, which are, again, affordable. Now, the challenge for architects now is, in general, is to, create, commodities like housing, which should be affordable to all. And so here you've got at least 4 different types of housing units, which are, again, they're operable modules. You can reconfigure them. You can even dismantle them. They can be located anywhere with minimal, connection, works like connections to the wire and electricity and all those sorts. You've got them all already, configured. They just need a bit of connection, and that's it. And the challenge here again was, how do I, as a designer, redefine the concept of efficiency, both in terms of energy use and also materiality. So one possible way of the materiality here is, again, with 3D printed or additive manufacturing of materials like recycled debris, plastics, or even sand, or even glass fiber. A combination of some of these. If there's there happens to be a chance of better performance and strength of materials if you consider creating hybrid or composite structures through 3D printing. In terms of energy use, passive design strategy is one of the key elements as far as sustainability is concerned, and of course net zero housing is concerned. Now, this is another challenge for architects and designers. How do you create net zero products, or products that have minimal impact on the environment or create minimal waste? So these were the things that were explored in throughout the semester for the design project. But just to quickly go through these units, you've got these units designed according to different target audience. So you've got type A, which is suitable for the student or a working individual that would be spending most of the time at work or travel. So it's just a studio unit with it's a loft apartment basically, and the second type is suitable for a young couple or just soon-to-be parents, or even just a young family. Yeah, it's more for one bedroom with living area. Type C is a triplex unit, which is suitable for a small family with 3 bedrooms, and and it has more or less the features of a typical villa or a townhouse. Villa wouldn't really be the appropriate word, the townhouse, except that the spaces here are more intimate and compact because of the size of the modules. And they're meant to be prefabricated, all of these units. And then you've got the fourth one finally, which is ideal for, let's say, 2 roommates or co-workers, even co-living. You've got you've got partners that co-live, and in that case, if you want to have that privacy, then type D is the ideal option, because you've got each of the individual has its own room, its own bathroom, and the only communal space they have is a kitchen and a living space, and that's it. So this is like the explored diagram of the mixed-use facility. Now, the challenge of this project is the site restrictions because of the limited plot given here. Now, this was part of the brief requirement, that even though as a class we had to, analyze the city, each of us would choose part of the city and propose an intervention, which is best suitable to our design research and manifesto, what we've derived from the analyses and design explorations. There was also each of us were given a restriction on the site, on how much site you can take to propose an intervention or to test your idea. And because of which, the advantage of that, to be honest, was help me think creatively, because normally what happens is when you propose or when you try to propose an agricultural facility, it's very tempting to take a large piece of land and, propose, several functions within it. Here, on the other hand, is, to rethink how can you, facilitate these sort of programs in a very limited space, in addition to housing, the housing complex, and the public spaces, and of course, mixed use spaces like, farmers market, which is something we're going to talk about in a moment. So you can see here you've got shading and rainwater canopies. Again, the function is to catch the rainwater and reuse it for recycling, and then eventually they're used for the growth of the food. And you've got the native vegetation for rooftop gardens, and you also have kitchen gardens here and there. So they're quite throughout the roof spaces. And again, you've got these algae facades, which they're not the same as the ones I've shown earlier. They're quite different after, design changes, but they happen to be more efficient in terms of the thermal performance and, natural ventilation of within the spaces. How can these spaces be cooled and heated? And I mean, the component here shows what it's like to use, like how an algae facade works, the components of that. So here's a section of the mixed use facility, and because the idea here was to achieve, to create a circular community within Subiaco, the main objective, which I haven't mentioned earlier, is it's that this mixed-use facility is a transit-oriented development. And what I mean is that there was a reason why I deliberately chose this part of the city, was because you've got a train station right next to this building that I've proposed. And I mean, you've got the railways passing by, and this, having the design here facilitates it facilitates access to public transit, which is crucial, and it in a way reduces the need of using autonomous vehicles, like cars and motorbikes. And in that way, residents or inhabitants within this community can make more use of the public facilities available, which is crucial. And that's just also how you educate them, like, about the importance of taking strategies or measures to prevent the impacts of our lifestyle choices on the environment. And by lifestyle, I mean the way, our consumption patterns, what is it that we like, the way we commute to work or travel, and of course how we again, it goes back to the consumption, but also like how we grow our own food, or we consume our food. So just to briefly go through this section drawing. So you've got these canopies, and they look more like the ones that you might have seen in, I'm sure some of you might have been to the Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. That's just how, I mean, in a way, that's just where I got the inspiration from, to be very honest. But I think they're quite crucial to have structures like these, or devices that can help catch rainwater. And the reason for that, again, is in Perth there's a serious water crisis. Like, it's just there's a greater demand than the supply of water, which was one of the major reasons why I had proposed the concept of regenerative agriculture as a medium for this project. because water is, again, it's a finite resource. Having access to clean water has now become quite a challenge. What can be done to provide an alternative? You know, how can we normalize the use of, let's say, seawater, or water with high salt content? How can we reuse them in our daily lives, whether it's in form of washing, growing our food, or even just drinking, right? There are ways like recycling them, which is one of the common ways to use non-fresh water, that's the word. And yeah, so the rooftop gardens, you've also got the kitchen gardens, where the community, the people, you have the opportunity to grow their own food, like I've mentioned. And this interesting part of the facility here is the well-being garden. And what I like about the space is, it offers, because it's circular in form, it helps, people to interact and engage, and, to collectively, just to engage collectively. And the idea of the space is, it's a wellness garden, or a well-being garden, and people come here to engage, to meditate, to relax, or just to contemplate and practice mindfulness. And you've got here the farmers market, which I've just mentioned a moment ago. And interesting thing about the farmers market here is that ideally it's supposed to be for the inhabitants that grow their own food in both the rooftop gardens and also the vertical farming, which is not shown in this, but it's going to be shown in the next few slides. But yeah, so the advantage here is that of having a farmers market is for the inhabitants to sell their produce. And again, this will help them foster that entrepreneurship skills, and of course, how to be self-sufficient, which is something that a lot of us have always wanted to achieve since COVID. Some of us have started with growing our own food or raising chickens. I have friends that have, and even a lecturer from a university, a tutor, he talked about raising his own poultry in his house. So one of the objectives, or the goals of this facility is to encourage self-sufficiency and in terms of entrepreneurship, in addition to the the main circular economy principles, which are applied through design, my bad. And of course, with education, to educate the community about recycling and reducing and reusing, which is important. And you've also got the public spaces here, which some of them also accommodate spaces for growing food. Though, and this one is more accessible to the public, whereas the farms on the rooftop they're ideally they're meant to be for the inhabitants within this housing complex, which is what you see here. You've got the housing units of different units and configuration. So this is just a glimpse of the rooftop garden, and this is specifically kitchen gardens. You can see here, people here are, just selecting, fruits or vegetables, whatever they want for their home. What is it that they need? So that's what that's just how urban farming helps bring people together, right? It also creates that sense of community where people are more involved in growing food together and also, using them collectively. And this is indoor vertical farm. So you've got them on all the levels, and it's important to have them as much as possible, because like I said, people have been more conscious about how the food that they consume is actually produced. So this having this facility of vertical farming is quite crucial, especially in today's time, in order to avoid the impacts of the common industrial practices, especially in agriculture, which have a negative impact on the environment. Now, agriculture is one of the main contributors to production of waste and emission of gases. And so what could be the alternative way to growing food, and of course with self-sufficiency? You've also got, this is just the interior view of an atrium space. You've got the farmers market right underneath, and then you've got the kitchen gardens above. So it's quite a transitory space, which looks interesting, like in terms of the ambience. And you've also got the indoor gardens and the vegetation. The idea here is to maximize the use of vegetation. The use of vegetation within this facility, especially in residential and in the public spaces. So this just brings me to the question, and I would like it if I, leave it open for discussion. How circular is our current design practice, and is circular economy really a fad of future? I would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on these two matters? Do you think circular economy is it a fad, or is it really a future, or is it something that's crucial? So Papa says it's mostly fad. Could you care to explain why do you think it's a fad?
And Kiara's hoping and saying that I think it's hopefully the future.
Yeah, hopefully it is the future. It could also be a fad, but why? I'm a bit curious.
And Zoe's saying that it's a bit of both. Everyone's hopping on the trend because it's relatively trendy now, but it is necessary for our future to be sustainable.
Absolutely.
And going back to Papa saying that because there's still third world countries that use cheaper materials which pollute more.
And that's the problem now, because again, circular economy, the whole terminology was coined. It's relatively new if you think about it, and because of that, businesses and design practices have started to adopt to alternatives, healthy alternatives to the mainstream methods of production, which are design and production, which are rather harmful, rather create waste as a result. And it's relatively new if you think about it, considering that a lot more people are now becoming aware, and because of that, businesses that sell products, sustainable products, quote unquote, they tend to be expensive because their claim is that this is something quite a new trend, and unfortunately it shouldn't be the case. the idea is to have these healthier alternatives more accessible to the people, and at the same time it should be affordable. But again, if you think about it, it will take years for almost any new product or new trend to achieve economies of scale in order to be affordable to the greater masses. I hope that answers your question, or
And Kiara builds on that. She's asking them, how do you think third world countries could implement this without the funds?
Okay, this is quite an interesting question. Also, it's a bit challenging because so I recently came across a project, and I'm just going to say first, to answer your question, is I think you first start with using local materials which create minimal impact on the environment and produce minimal waste. Now there's a school project which was designed by I think he was a Ghanaian architect. I'm really sorry, I can't recall which part of Africa he was from, but he won a scholarship to study in the Netherlands, and then once he came back to his hometown, like he came from a town which is facing extreme poverty, and children there have no access to education. And his idea was, what could be done to solve this problem? How do you build? And that is to build a school. And how can you build a school with limited resources or funding? And what he did was he used the local materials, which was in that case mud and sand, and there were some other materials which I cannot recall at the moment. I'm really sorry, but what happened was I think there were more local materials in which women and children were also involved in the manufacturing. I mean, it wasn't like manufacturing, quote unquote, but it was more like a collective or participatory process. Like they were all involved in the design and construction stage, the whole community. So you've got women and children, they would be stepping on, larger chunks of, the local materials like mud or even rocks. Yeah, they were stones, people step on them, and until they would be finally converted into, just powder, and then they could later be used in, as a smooth surface. And yeah, so the point I'm trying to say, just to answer your question, is to first look for local materials. And this is in general, not just in third world countries. In almost any project, it's best to consider local materials because, of course, they reduce the costs of, the import costs. And if they're sustainable, or if they are of low impact, if they don't consume a lot of energy, then local materials are the ideal ones to consider when you're designing a product or a structure.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Mohammed. And one final question there from Manuel. He's asking, what do you think are the main impediments for circular economy globally?
Sorry, could you rephrase the question?
So what do you think are the main impediments or limitations for circular economy globally?
I don't think there is quite the limitations, but I think as of now, it's the lack of knowledge that people in general have of the circular economy. Again, like I said, it's often that circular economy is mistaken for recycling. I mean, like I said, recycling is crucial. It's part of circular economy, but again, these two terminologies should not be treated as synonymous. And now, sure, every strategy or sustainable method has its own drawbacks and also positive impacts. Now, at the moment, I really cannot think of any limitations of circular economy, because I think the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages, and that is one of them being regenerative design, which reduces costs, and as a result reduces the need of using virgin materials, right? Which as a result reduces the need to extract resources which are already finite and they're being abused. We are just abusing the resources in a terrible way. And of course, and also it's the same with the land. We're just excavating land after land, and without even considering what to do with these lands, how can they be reused for other purposes. I mean, there's now a growing trend of landscape architects and even architects and urban designers proposing ways to transform abandoned quarries or lands of excavation into into public spaces like community parks, for instance.
Amazing. And one final one from Chiara, she said, very interesting, thank you. And how can local architects in those countries be informed about these projects and implement them into the community? She's thinking more about how to get the information out there in the real world.
Yeah, that's, I think, an interesting question you've asked, Chiara. So unfortunately, the whole concept of circular economy is not very widely available to the people, like I've said, right? But I think it's about time that, especially with with firms and even practices, even government agencies promote these sort of trends into, I think, from what I personally believe is that governments do play a role in informing the people, including architects and designers, in the importance of adopting circular principles, in not just in the governance or design framework, but also in the basic lifestyle, right? And that is educating ourselves. First of all, we must educate ourselves, both as as designers and also as individuals, about how crucial it is for us to design with sensitivity, consider the impact our products or the spaces or the structures or the services that we create can have an impact on the future generations, and of course on the environment, which is very crucial. And with that said, we also need to start adopting circular principles into our daily lives by first evaluating our lifestyle, reassessing our consumption patterns and the choices we make. And that is let's start with, say, plastic, right? Where is plastic used at home? What can be, is there any alternative to plastic, let's say for straws or for any other product or appliance? What's the more sustainable alternative, as opposed to having or using single-use plastic bags or plastic straws? I mean, I think even businesses have that role in changing the people's lifestyle. Like, you now have retail stores, especially in grocery stores, where there's now a rule that you cannot enter the premises unless you bring your own bag to shop, because a lot of times people still tend to carry, use plastic bags, and they still have an impact, like a negative impact on the wildlife. You see the marine animals choking up on plastics, and it's quite disheartening, to see that this is where this is what we have done, as humans. Again, the whole anthropogenic process, over the past 2 centuries, have gone into something that we haven't expected, and especially with something which I find very terrifying, frankly speaking. Like, almost a month ago, when the environmental agency and the UK government released a statement about the environment, and they said, adapt or die, right? I'm sure some of you might have had a look into the statement and the report. So, I mean, it's not an exaggeration. Statistics show that, we only have 1 or 2 generations to survive if we don't, consider change, or to make a difference. And it's very crucial at this time. Yes, a major shift for architecture, and that's what's important. Like, again, back to the government, I can use an example of Amsterdam. I personally see it as a champion of the circular practice in the cities. So the whole system has been, rewired and restructured by the government. So the concept of circular principles were applied not just in the governance, but also in the design framework of how, houses should be built, and whether plastics should be banned, the alternatives to autonomous vehicles, like maximizing facilities for biking or public transport, and of course increasing awareness and educating more about the importance of reducing waste, whether you're producing or you're consuming. Both ways you need. If only this was implemented sooner. Right. It's just unfortunately people don't realize what, we just don't tend to realize that how serious of a problem is unless we face it, right? So now with the COP26, and again with the report by the environmental agency, and even reports from agencies like the IPCC are, I mean, there are no exaggerations, or they're not just they're false. Every bit of what they say is accurate. The statistics are clear evidence that it's about time we implemented these strategies, and or else there's no turning back. And there is no planet B. I mean, technically there is now planet B, considering that people have now explored Mars, but that does not mean that you consider conquering another planet and then just leave the previous one in shambles. We can't do that. This is our planet. We need to find a way to reduce the impact on the environment, which as a result will create a destructive impact on the society, on the individuals as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Amazing. And on that note as well, guys, there's a really interesting exhibition at the moment at the Design Museum London, Waste Age, and what can design do, and design responding to waste, and the whole circular economy concept there as well. So definitely feel free to check that out. And to conclude, Mohammed, many thanks for that. Like, it's a really interesting and insightful talk, an overview of the circular economy in design, intertwined with your experience, your work, case studies in architecture and interiors. And again, all the participants definitely have a read of Mohammed's article, Step Up Your Portfolio Game. It's featured on pages 103 and 104 of the MDXPD 2021 magazine. It's a fantastic resource for students on creating a design and digital portfolio. Also, a shout out to Mohammed's sister, Anam, an architectural designer. She was on the talk earlier, and she also gave a guest lecture last year, Designing in Dubai, Middle East Creative City of Design. So definitely feel free to check that out from last year's webinars. And to conclude a fantastic talk and Q&A, thanks for your time and the talk, the insights, and details of the talk and the speaker were sent to your emails ahead of the talk, including links to Mohammed's website, his social media handle. Definitely feel free to browse and connect. And thank you, Mohammed, for taking out your time and joining us tonight. It was informative, a great overview from a lens of design and architecture. And whenever you're down in the UK and London, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd love to host you on campus.
We'd love to. And thank you once again for having me here. And to conclude, I'd like to quote Annie Leonard with the statement that there is no such thing as away. When we throw anything away, it must go somewhere. So thank you.
But for all of the staff, all of the students, that are alumni and participants, thanks a lot for your time. We really look forward to seeing you all again next week. So keep an eye out on your emails for the details of the speaker and links to the talk. And until next time, stay well, stay safe, and thank you guys.
Thank you very much.